gentleman we're going to talk to today is the one and only Kermit Weeks. Now, Kermit owns the world's largest private collection of vintage and classic aircraft, over 140 aircraft, and it's his. He says that, you know, an aircraft in that collection he has either flown, does fly, or will fly, and there's no aircraft in that collection that he hasn't planned to fly or hasn't flown already. So, pretty impressive stuff. These Inspire-Ability talks have now been running, would you believe, for almost a year. We are well over 20, and it's, I think, a position I feel quite fortunate to be in, because I'm the one who gets to interview these greats of aviation. And we've spoken to pioneers, we've spoken to record breakers, we've spoken to all sorts of pilots from all sorts of different backgrounds from around the world. You know, we will continue to do that. And the reason we're doing this, of course, is to raise money for this wonderful charity, Aerobility. It's getting this charity out there, it's getting us heard, it's getting our name out there, and most importantly, it's getting us understood, because we deliver a service to the disabled community in aviation, but beyond aviation as well. Anyone who feels they could realize their dreams, perhaps improve their lives, improve their outlook, can use aviation as a tool to do so. And we're going to hear a lot about that with somebody who shares those values today. Now, you can use this opportunity to donate a little or as much as you wish to Aerobility this afternoon as you listen to this talk to underwrite our survival. The gentleman we're going to talk to today is the one and only Kermit Weeks. Now, Kermit, otherwise known as the Wizard of Orlampa, we're going to hear about why he has that name in just a moment, but I'm going to take the opportunity to give you all a bit of a background on Kermit. Some of you may not realize where he's come from, what he's up to, but also where he's going. You know, he really is a guy that inspires so many people. And it's not just about the aviation. In fact, it's, in his words, it's using aviation as a tool for people to realize their potential. And I mean, there can't be a better parallel to what we do there. So we're going to hear a lot about that. But Kermit is an aviation enthusiast and pilot, an aircraft builder and mechanic. He owns the world's largest private collection of vintage and classic aircraft, over 140 aircraft. And it's his, he says that, you know, an aircraft in that collection he has either flown, does fly, or will fly. And there's no aircraft in that collection that he hasn't planned to fly or hasn't flown already. So pretty impressive stuff. Kermit is a world-class aerobatic champion, and he's also an award-winning author. Now, I have actually one of his books right here. Kermit signed this book for my daughter at the Oshkosh Air Show back in 2016, and there we go. There's the proof. So if you've got kids out there, Kermit is an award-winning author. He's published 4 books, and they really are very entertaining. Kermit, as I said, he's a designer. He's designed and built 2 aircraft of his own, the Weeks Special and the Weeks Solution, and that took him very neatly into aerobatics. And we may know Kermit for his Warbird exploits and his classic collection, but actually at the beginning it all started in the late 70s with his aerobatic competition flying, and he was placed world top 3 5 times. Won 20 medals in World Aerobatic Championship competitions over 15 years on the US National Aerobatic Team, and has won the US Nationals twice. So when we meet Kermit, we'll start there. We'll start at the origin, how it happened, and then how it led into what he's up to today. But the collection grew and grew. The collection began in the 70s and 80s, and it originally resided in Miami, but then moved to Polk City in Florida, just off the I-4 west towards Tampa. I'm sure many of you know it well who've been to Fantasy of Flight, which is Kermit's home. And he probably spends more time there than he does at home. like we all do at the airfield at the weekends. But we're going to hear a lot about that historic collection and how he keeps those aircraft in the air. But I want to finish with my introduction to Kermit about, the recognition he's had for what he's doing for aviation around the world. As I said, his reputation and stature across aviation is fantastic. His peers have recognized him many times. He's had a lot of awards and recognition for the work he does. So without further ado, I'm very privileged and honored to introduce Kermit.
Hey, John, how's it going?
How are you?
I'm doing great.
It's good to see you, Kermit. So what's it like out there? It's like you're in your office in Florida, is that right?
Yeah, sitting in the office, fantasy of flight, a little gray skies today, so you guys would feel at home.
Yes, we would. I'm in my short sleeves, but it's the central heating that's keeping me, in my short sleeves today, not just the weather outside. So how's lockdown been? I mean, how's fantasy of flight? Have you had the chance to do much flying in the last few months?
I can fly if I want to, but I've really been using the time to focus on developing some things, doing some writing and some other projects. So currently I've only got one airplane in license right now, my little S-39 Sikorsky, and it's a great go-to airplane for me because I can get it in and out of the hangar easy. I can go take off and land in the water, land behind my house and taxi up, and give a ride or two if I need to. So it's always at my disposal.
Yeah, that's good. No, it's there's a lot of us that have been doing that, haven't they? Either getting in the hangar and just doing stuff to the aircraft that we haven't had the time to do, or DIY. But look, Kermit, we haven't got a lot of time, and we've got a lot to pack in, and very much looking forward to the story, the life story, and then bringing it up to date. So I wanted to ask you, Kermit, the question that's on most people's lips. How did it all begin, and what inspired you to get into aviation?
Well, it was interesting. There was nobody in my family that was directly connected with aviation. It's been part of my past. I think people that follow me on my Facebook page realize I've always had two parallel paths of interest. One of them is obvious, everybody knows about, and that's the path of a fascination with what I call outer flight, the airplanes, flying aerobatics and stuff. But at the same time, in my early years, I began to develop an interest of what I call inner flight. And when I was reading books early on about airplanes and history and aces and that kind of stuff, I was reading books about paranormal, psychic phenomena, ESP, parapsychology, eventually metaphysics and spirituality. And these two parallel paths followed me through my life and had nothing to do with each other until after Fantasy of Flight opened several years. And it was at that point I realized that, what I was here to do, and partly, what my mission here is. And there's a bit of a woo-woo side to me I've alluded to, and I haven't really talked about it a lot, but beginning to come out of my metaphysical closet, so to speak. And flight has been very much a part of my past, and I'm talking way past. I have had the opportunity. I've never done any drugs in my life, so let me get that off the table. Never smoked pot, nothing. And there was a reason for that, because nobody would believe my stories when they begin to come out. And I've had a chance to explore other realities. I connect with other realities. I went to a place called the Monroe Institute, where they use a sound technology to get you to go within and explore your own consciousness. And I've had some very, very interesting metaphysical type things. And in the process of that, I've learned about my past. So I've actually come from, in the human form, this is my fourth lifetime in aviation. I built gas balloons outside of Paris in the early 1800s. I flew for the Germans in the First World War. I flew P-51s for the Americans in the Second World War. This is number 4. But I've also seen past lives in other life forms, test flying starfighters and on other planets and way, way in the past. So this has just been part of my spiritual DNA since I began. Not only the outer, but the inner as well.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I think, we're all on a journey, aren't we? A journey of discovery. And my goodness, aviation has brought brought me out of myself, discovered my inner soul. And, it's quite it lays your character and your soul quite bare, doesn't it? In the aircraft, it's just you and the machine. And, it's a great leveler as well. But there's not that many people who started as early as you did. I mean, tell us a story about, it seems like you've always had a spanner and a hammer in your hand at some point in your life. And it was only a matter of time before you put that to the design of an aircraft. Tell us a story there about your early designs.
Well, it was interesting. When I was a kid, I was always fascinated with dreaming and designing and building. And when we would learn something about school, like the Pueblo Indians, I would go build a mud fort. Or we'd learn about, my first airplane I built, there's a picture somewhere of a little biplane. I was 8 years old, and the landing gear design was a bit beyond my technical ability at the time. So I improvised and I put it on top of my little radio flyer wagon, and I'd go down the street dream, because we had a little bit of a hill there, dreaming about flying, And so, but it was not just flight. That was one aspect. I remember designing a submarine when I was probably like 10 or something like that. That's my first airplane right there when I was 8. That's building my airplane when I was 18. But basically, I had a little submarine design, and I knew that it had to be buoyant to a certain degree. And so I had it weighted down, and the way I could go up and down was to have it a little bit heavy. And I had some bicycle tires, like inner tubes from a car on the outside, and I had a bicycle pump inside the submarine so I could go up and down. So I was thinking about like that stuff early on. But I basically started flying control line airplanes in my early teens. That evolved into radio control when I was in 10th grade. Eventually started learning to fly when I was 16, and bought a set of plans for an airplane that I built most of before I graduated from high school, before I turned 18. I went on to test fly the airplane when I was 22, and it was downhill from there.
Yeah. So I remember in my flying, I learned to fly. I got the bug, and then I had a choice. I could get my twin rating CPL, go down that road, or go down the fun road. I chose the fun road like you did.
Yeah.
And aerobatics has to be the discipline that just polishes your airmanship, your handling, your knowledge of yourself and the machine. And obviously getting to the level you did, you really must have put the time in, and obviously could fall back on your engineering knowledge as well. I mean, how did the aerobatic flying begin?
Well, it was interesting. Like I said, this flight aspect has been part of my spiritual DNA. I started to learn how to fly when I was 16. Back then, they used to have a Cessna $5 coupon in Flying Magazine. You clipped it out, and you could do an introductory ride for $5. Okay, I did that, and my first official lesson, my instructor was showing me spins. Okay, it was like destined to be. I was in my on my high school gymnastic team, and I was used to flipping around in the gym, so I immediately gravitated. It felt natural flipping around in the sky, and there was an aerobatic school on the airport, and eventually, I started taking some basic aerobatic lessons, and basically, actually, I taught myself aerobatics. So I had done 2 loops and 2 snap rolls in a Stearman with somebody. And I knew how to do spins in a Cessna 150 and stuff. I got checked out in a Citabria, which is aerobatic spelled backwards. Okay. And a friend of mine, had gotten checked out before I did. And I said, hey, do you want to learn how to do aerobatics? So I showed him how to do loops, and I'd kind of do rolls, just barrel rolls and stuff, and snap rolls and spins. And I'd never done a hammerhead in my life before. I said, yeah, let's try hammerhead. And we pull up and kick the rudder and kind of wallowed around, So we taught ourselves, and I'd lay upside down on the couch, because when you're upside down, the controls reverse, because the rudder and the ailerons are if you think about it right side up, think about it upside down. So I'd lay on the back of my couch and pretend I was doing inverted turns, and eventually started doing inverted turns. in an airplane that had no inverted system. So as soon as you got to here, the engine quit and it wouldn't start again until you got back around. So you really had to learn, how not to dish out. So it was fascinating. This was the 1982 World Aerobatic Championships in Spitzenberg, and I won the gold medal in this flight that's being shown right here. That's my Weeks solution. So I eventually got into aerobatics, and I had a bit of a formal education, never really agreed with me, but I've been a life learner, and I dropped out of 3 schools. The last one and the most prestigious was Purdue University. And I had started my freshman year over again in aeronautical engineering, and it just wasn't happening. And I said, forget this. There were some other things that happened, and it was part of my life plan. I realized that now I was not destined to do formal education. So I had no formal training in aeronautical engineering. I left Purdue. By this time I had a S2A Pitts that I was competing in advanced. I went home. I rented a shop space, went out and bought a heliarc welder, taught myself how to heliarc weld, and designed the Weeks Special. And in that airplane, I made the U.S. aerobatic team when I was 24 years old. It had the biggest engine propeller combination that anybody put in an aerobatic airplane that size. Curtis Pitts was working on one as well, and he lived 20 miles from me, so he was a friend. And I went to my first World Aerobatic Championship in '78 in Czechoslovakia, a complete unknown, 61 competitors, 18 countries. I got 3 silvers and a bronze and ended up 2nd overall in the world. And I'm like, well, this is pretty cool. So I was designing the Weeks solution on the airplane as we were going home. And instead of going to the next engine, which was a 260 horsepower airplane, I jumped and I went to the 300 horse and I came up with the Weeks solution, which is the black airplane. And, these went through different iterations. The Weeks Special had 2 separate wings that I had tried. The Weeks solution, I flew 4 or 5 world championships, and including all the cross-country time around Europe to Canada, to Oshkosh, practices, all the contests I went to, and all the practice time was only 650 hours total time. So I was just naturally a pilot, and I would always, it was very interesting. I always thought like I was the director of a film, and where people would, because in the cockpit, you use the references of the airplane to be perfectly vertical, because, air show flying is like being at the circus. Competition flying is like a gymnastic meet. You're being graded on the precision. And while everybody at a world championship does do all the maneuvers and the sequences, there's a big difference between the quality of the guy that's first and the guy that's last. And so I always would not only use the ability in the airplane to see it, but I would think of what the judges were seeing. And there were times when I knew the judges, like if I'm about to go out of the box, the wind's blowing me out to get a penalty point, the judge couldn't tell if I was vertical or not. I would cock the airplane down. I'd stay in the box. Everybody else would go out. So I was thinking, what are the judges seeing? Not what am I seeing inside the airplane? And I think that was another ability that I had to be able to perceive what the judges were looking at.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because it's always said, isn't it, that if you're an air show pilot, the best schooling is to be having gone through the competition aerobatic route, because you understand so many of those basic rules, and of course it polishes your flying. And I think for competition aerobatics, it's again, a bit like being on your own in a single seater. Everything's laid bare, isn't it? You can't hide. And what was it like to sort of weigh up the field around you? Because I know the Russians really kind of hit at a world level. The Russians really started going for it in the 80s with the Yak-50. They designed that aircraft to ultimately win the world championship. So who were the dominating nations when you started, and where did you leave it? And then before you went on to your next chapter.
Yeah, it was fascinating. It was interesting because the Russian pilots, that was basically their job. They were aerobatic instructors, and that was their job. When they flew on the team, that was part of their job. everybody on the U.S. team, man, we were just weekend warriors. It was a hobby, modifying and building our own airplanes and blah, blah, blah. And it was really a fantastic expression of the different cultures. Okay. And I remember in Czechoslovakia, my first world championship, there was a group that came down from, they were like the equivalent of the Czechoslovakian NASA. And they came down and they singled me out because I was doing fairly well. And I ended up second behind a Czech. And basically, they interviewed me through an interpreter. And they said it was one of the coolest things to express myself of the freedom that we have in America. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, basically, we understand you designed and built the airplane. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, what was your, you got an aeronautical engineering degree, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, actually, I dropped out of school. And it was pretty much eyeball engineering. And I knew what worked from other airplane designs. And I knew what was weaker and what was stronger. And if I got into, and I know it was only, there was no reason. I never asked a question on the design of the week special, but I did ask 2 engineering questions to somebody that I knew I was beyond my element to give me a tubing size by extending my engine mount or something. So the first thing was, where are you going to an aeronautical engineer? No, I dropped out of school. The second was, well, we heard that you built this. Yeah, I built it, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, and they said, well, so you're a certified welder. I said, well, no, actually, I taught myself how to weld, and I gas rigged it, and I read about it, and I knew you had penetration, and I cut it, and I'd look at it, make sure it was okay. And finally, I welded up a T, and I beat the crap out of it. And when the tube broke before the weld did, I declared myself a welder, and I finished my first airplane, And then the next one, they said, well, is there, how did you do the design? Did you do this in a wind tunnel? And I just looked at him, I pointed up, and I said, the sky is my wind tunnel. I felt so good. And these guys were looking at me like, I'm not just a kid. I'm 25 years old at that point. So,
yeah, just strap it on your back and just go, just try.
Yeah. But, one of the things about competition aerobatic flying is you learn the limits of not only the airplane, but yourself. And this applies to life. This is a great metaphor for life because, obviously with the G-forces and stuff, you have to know you're tightening up your stomach. If you're doing a bunch of negative stuff and then all of a sudden it's followed by something that's, hard positive maneuver, you've got the chance of blacking out. I blacked out one time and I woke up headed at the ground at about a 30-degree angle at 800 feet. And I've known other people that have blacked out. And, so you got to know your own physical thing. And it used to take us, if you hadn't done aerobatics in a while, it took me in Unlimited about 3 days to get my G tolerance back. And, you see the guys on the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds. Yeah, they got G. Well, I don't think the Blue Angels do, but they've got G suits, but they're not doing any negative stuff. Anything we did positive, we did negative as well. And transition from negative to positive can mess you up in a hurry. But the other thing is knowing the limits of what the airplane has and the controls you have to make it do what you want to do. One of the things that happens is there's an airplane called a Humpty Bump where you're going vertical and you pull around this way. Okay, basically you go up and then you pull around like an inside loop. Okay, well, the airplane wants to do that easily, but when you're going around the other way, the airplane and the torque are working opposite. And as you're running out of speed and you've run out of aileron and the wing starts dropping, you got to start using the throttle to come back to keep the wings level. So you've got to know what the limits and what controls you've got to do. And so I see that as a metaphor for life. What do you have as a way of talents and skills? What can you do to get more out of them? And what are your personal limitations that you can expand your potential on, So to me, aerobatic flying was the epitome of the expression of the metaphor of flight in this 5-sense, three-dimensional reality. So I think that was part of the reason why I was drawn to it. And, like you said, I flew 5 or 6 world championships, won 20 medals. And at some point, the big deal was there was a big fork in my path of life, and that was Hurricane Andrew. I had just come back from what became my last world championship in France, which was a no contest because the weather, they only had 1 flight, so they didn't declare world champion. And I came back, flew the air show at Oshkosh, landed. The next weekend, Hurricane Andrew came through, collapsed my whole museum, crushed my airplanes, and neither one of them has been rebuilt. And I knew at that point I was done with aerobatics. And literally 4 months later, after 4 years of working, they handed me my permit to build Fantasy of Flight. And life was saying, it's time to get out of Miami. Let's go to Central Florida and focus on Fantasy of Flight.
Yeah.
Sometimes life whacks us upside the head really hard, and that's called a clue by 4.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, and just to talk about the the G tolerance and the human factors. You may have heard of the very famous wartime pilot in the UK, Douglas Bader, who had his legs amputated before the war, and then became a famous pilot flying the Spitfire. We know the family of Douglas, and it's very interesting because NASA were keen to understand his tolerance on G, because of course he didn't have lower limbs where the blood could pool and affect his consciousness. So yeah, that whole topic is really quite fascinating, and of course everyone's different, everyone's made differently and reacts differently in the cockpit, and I'm sure that has advantages and disadvantages as well. But just as you've neatly taken us into the next chapter of your life, Kermit, you left aerobatics behind, but clearly set you up perfectly in terms of flying these wonderful machines that you now own and operate. So you had obviously begun collecting vintage and classic aircraft. Tell us about the early days. Obviously at some point there had to be a place for you to put them all, which was Miami. So tell us about the early days.
Well, it was interesting. While the flight thing was happening on this parallel path, the metaphysical one was also going on, and they were beginning to interact. In my early 20s, I started having conscious out-of-body experiences, and this happened for about 3 decades. But it was interesting. When I was digging out from the rubble of Hurricane Andrew, I was beginning to sense something was guiding me, okay? And I never got a blinding flash of light, but over the years, I've developed this sense. I won't go into all the details, but basically, I developed this connection, and I was trained at some level to learn how to connect with other aspects of self, or whatever you want to call it. And what I've learned to do is, and I didn't realize at the time, but for the first half of my life, I was being nurtured along on my path, and I didn't realize it. It's almost like at this level of a reality, we're puppets. And at the puppet level, we don't have a clue what's coming down the pike, okay? But there's this other aspect of us that's the puppeteer from a metaphorical point of view. And, one of the ways synchronicity works is the puppeteers talk behind the scenes. Maybe that's why we're having this conversation, and 3 months ago, we didn't know we were going to have it. Okay, so that's one of the ways synchronicity works. But also what happens, what I've learned over the time and what developed, and I was trained to do, is once you learn to connect through the strings, you become a unit and go through this life, whether it's through intuition, a sense of knowing. Everyone has to discover how they can utilize that for their own purpose. But at some level, it's just you, okay? You're not surrendering to anything other than just you from what I've been shown and whatever. There's different aspects of you or whatever. So basically, you get to go through this reality like Avatar as a unit, mission control. And what happens is really anything outside of that is potential ego land, okay? I dropped ego so long ago, and I just now, and one of the things that's happened that I basically, we all channel at some level when ideas spontaneously come into our mind. It's the puppeteers dropping ideas and blah, 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 or whatever you want to call it. But I've developed it to the point to where I channel every day. I'm literally talking to my friends, okay? I use them for business decisions. I've gone over past history. It's phenomenal. And what became so obvious in my story, and I know there's people that can't relate to this, but there are people that do, but we can all relate to, going to pick up the phone and you kind of know who it is before you get it. It's little things like that. And we all have the ability, even though we live in a 5 sense reality, we all have the ability to tap into that 6th sense, if you will. And, I've just learned to live that way. And, the only thing I'll say, I was going to save it to the end, and I'll save it to the end, but I want to repeat it now, is the fact that the only thing I would recommend that anybody consider doing is, number one, be true to yourself. Okay? Listen to others and listen to peer pressure and blah, blah, blah. But number one, always be true to yourself. And number two, and this is key to what Fantasy of Flight's all about, is follow those energies that lead you beyond yourself. Because at some level, what I was shown and what I realize now is that aspect that's leading you beyond yourself is just you saying, come this way. Okay? Yeah. So learn to connect through the strings in whatever way that means to you, and play with it. You may make mistakes, you may stumble here and there, but you'll learn from those things and get it to work for you.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. And what pops into my mind, Kermit, is dreams, ambition, hope. Particularly in times like these, it does make us think about the finer things, the things we want but we can't have. And I do agree. I think again, using aviation as that pathway. A lot of us have probably realized dreams, but we can also make new ones, and I think for the guys and girls in Aerobility, that's really important. And I think with the lockdowns that have happened recently, the other part of society, the part of society that doesn't have to deal with disability or loneliness, has actually understood what it means, because disability can be a lonely, isolating experience. And so I do feel that your comments are really justified, particularly in these times. It's really quite interesting to hear you talk about that.